All right, hello everyone. Can everyone in the back hear me okay? Is this working? You can hear me? Okay, cool. Welcome to Technica and welcome to our workshop today. So we're going to be talking about app development today through a really cool application using Thunkable. And before I start, I will say that today's workshop is just like the bare bones basics of app development, meaning that pretty much we're working with people who have little to no coding experience. So I will say that if you have a little bit of Thunkable experience or anything like that, this workshop might seem a little not as engaging as you'd want it to be. But feel free to take whatever I introduce, the concepts that I introduced today, feel free to take that and expand upon it in between the little breaks we have. So let's get started. All right, so our agenda for today, we're going to be discussing why app development. We're going to be setting up Thunkable. It should take maybe like 5 to 10 minutes. We're going to be creating our own counter app, and we're going to be doing a few challenges towards the end. So let's talk about our favorite apps. So does anyone want to shout out their favorite app that maybe they've used in the past hour? Me too. I love Spotify. Spotify has a great user interface, and we'll talk a little bit more about that later. Anyone else have any apps they want to talk about? Venmo. I just use Venmo. Venmo's so good. Anyone else? Anyone else? Yeah. Instagram, very big one. Anyone else? Any other apps? Any at all? So basically, these apps are created in different ways, and they're made in a way that they're made to be addictive, right? So when we create apps, we kind of want to talk about how do we create apps that people want more from, right? They're reaching for their phones, they're reaching for it, and they kind of crave the experience of the application. So what do you think goes into creating an app? What do you think is the thought process behind it? Meaning, like, how do we plan it out? Yeah. Exactly. Who's the target audience of our app? Anyone else? Yeah. How you want the user to interact with your app. So what does the user want out of the app, and how can you give that to them in a satisfying way? Anyone else? I think I saw a hand back there. Yeah. So you're identifying a problem and a purpose that you're trying to solve with your application. These are all really good things that goes into making a good app, and we're going to talk a little more about that later. But so why do we learn app development? So apps are used for pretty much everything nowadays. And in fact, smartphones are actually beginning to replace computers in our daily lives. I don't know if you've noticed, but a lot of us tend to use our phones a lot more than we use our laptops. And it's starting to become the type of thing where we're using our phones so much to the point where we have a lot of our immediate necessities are on our phone now. So, and it teaches you creativity. So you can change the world with your apps. I'm sure a lot of you know the story of Mark Zuckerberg, Jobs, all these things. And yeah, they've essentially changed the world through their applications, and we can do that as well. So what do you think makes a good app? What distinguishes an app that's maybe not as great as an app that makes the user crave more from it?
The user interface is very important, number one.
User interface. Exactly. You want your app to look pretty, you want it to look good, you want it to look satisfying to the user that's using it. Yeah. Yeah, exactly. It's user friendly. It's easy to utilize. It's easy to go through and manage, things like that. Anything else? Yeah. Publicity. So an app is worthless if no one's using it, right? So you want your app to be able to get out into the open, and you want people to utilize it as much as they can. Anything else? Yeah. Sorry, could you say that again? I don't think I heard you. Okay. Yeah, so cross interface, things like that. So being able to take your application from one device and use it on your
So
now we're going to get into the actual designing of our app. So if everyone could go to this link right here, it's on Thunkable.com, and we're gonna start setting up our environment, and we're gonna start creating apps. So I'm gonna give you a few minutes, and I'm gonna walk you through the steps of creating your Thunkable account. So if I could get a thumbs up from everyone once they're at the link. Is anyone having any problems with Thunkable right now? Or maybe you are? Oh, the Wi-Fi? Oh, I'm sorry. All right. I think most of us are on Thunkable, so we're gonna keep going. You're gonna want to click Create New App, which should be right in the middle once you logged into Thunkable, created your account, and all of that. Actually, I think I'm gonna try to do that too. All right, so we've logged into Thunkable, and then we're gonna hit Create New App. And then once we get here, we're gonna title our project My Counter App. And you could title it whatever you'd like to title your application, but for now, I'm gonna title it My Counter App because that's our goal for today's workshop. And I think you have to put a category here, so you can put any category. I'm putting education. And you want to make sure this is clicked, right? We want to utilize the drag and drop builder. And that's going to help us code a little more easily for today's workshop. And then once we've done that, oh, project. Create it. And this is Thunkable interface. So we have a big screen here, and this is where we're going to be creating our app, and we're going to be adding different elements we see over here. These are our components. So this is how the user actually interacts with the things that we're putting on the screen. So we have buttons, we have labels, we have images, and we have text input. The more you get into Thunkable, you can probably get into these components down here. And they're really not difficult to get into. But for today, we're just going to focus on these four. So we're going to focus on buttons, labels, images, and text input.
Hello?
And I'm going to go back to the slideshow real quick.
If you can hear me, the virtual users
And
can't.
titled it. And is everyone on this screen right now?
Hello?
You're good? You're not? Anyone else need help? All right, so if the rest of us are on the screen, we're gonna keep going. And we're gonna actually design our first application. So, like I talked about earlier, these are the four components we're gonna be focusing on today, right? So we're gonna be focusing on labels, and that's how you display any form of text on your screen. We're gonna be putting buttons, and that's how the user interacts with our application. We're gonna be using text input, so we're allowing the user to input some kind of text, and then we can play around with that as we want. And we're also gonna display an image on the screen. So our very first checkpoint, we're gonna do four things.
So I want you guys to drag one label and create a title that says my counter, right? And then you're gonna drag two other labels below that. So if you see, we have three labels. We have my counter on top, we have pump, and then we have 0. Those are our 3 labels. And we also have one button that says click me, right? And the purpose of our first ever app is it's not the most functional application, but we're just getting into this and we can expand more on this later. But it's kind of like, has anyone in here played Cookie Clicker before? You have, that's kind of the purpose of our application. We're just, once the user clicks the button, then the count number goes up. So I'm gonna give you guys maybe 3 minutes-ish to do this if you haven't. And once you've finished, if I can see thumbs up from people, that'd be good. All right. And I'll do it with you actually. So. Oh, I see it. Okay, I can. Gotcha. Gotcha. Okay. Next is up. Yeah, what's up?
Would you mind going back to where you were earlier, like
Mhm.
dragging the label, and then what's next?
Gotcha. Sorry, wish I had a split screen, but I don't. Ooh, which one am I like? Okay. Yeah, so these are our 4 checkpoints. We just want to set this. We want our counter at the top. We want our title. We want 2 other labels that says count and 0. And then we just want a button that says click me. And obviously you can mess around with the things that it says. You can change what the button says. You can change the font, the size, things like that. It's your app and you can play around with it. So also gonna put that here. All right. So here I'm dragging over my label. It will go over. Right. And then I'm dragging counts. It's not working with me today. All right. And if you've noticed, as you drag things onto your screen, you start to see them on the side here, right? So this we're going to talk about later. We have our one screen, which is the screen in front of us. And then we also have our button, which we drag right here. We have label 3, we have label 2 and label 1. And you want to remember which labels are which. And by doing that, you can just click that little, there's a little pencil here. You can change the label. So I'm going to name this count number. And then for this label, I'm going to name that just count. And then for a button, I'm going to name that. All right. Does anyone need any help or anything like that? Is this all making sense? It's good. Cool. All right. Now I'm going to change this to. All right. Has everyone gotten here so far? You good? All right, let's move on. Yeah.
Just to clarify, so count and 0, they're belonging to different labels, right?
2 different labels, yeah. So we want something to display like what the count is, and then we want the actual count as 2 separate labels.
Okay.
Yeah, and I'll explain why later, but let's get back into it. All right, so these are the properties of our components, right? So our labels, our buttons, things like that, these are all components that we're utilizing in our app, and we can change how it looks to the user by playing with the properties. So we can change the font size, we can change the actual font, we can change the color and the sizes. And messing around with the properties of components is a big it's a very big reason on why people would want to come back to your app, right? The aesthetic of your app. So playing around with this is a really good way of being able to bring the user back to your application. So checkpoint 2, we're going to play around with the properties. So if you want to change the font size of your counter label and change the color and size of the click me button. And you can experiment with the properties. They're pretty simple to figure out once you play around with it. But I'm gonna give you maybe 5 minutes and you can mess around with the background as well. I can show you how to do that. And yeah, I'll give you guys 5 minutes for that. And of course, if anyone's struggling, anyone needs help, just raise your hand and we'll come help out. All right, hopefully you played around with that enough, but we're gonna move on for now. All right, so if we kept adding components, what would happen, right? So good names help tell different components from each other, and they also help programmers understand what the role of the component is, right? So if any of you have taken a coding class before, you might have learned that variable names are super important because they help distinguish what each individual aspect of the thing that you're programming will do, right? So we want to create good and useful names that will help distinguish the purpose of each component. So I already ran through this really briefly, but naming your components, what you would do is you would go to where it says screens, and then you could just click whichever component name you want to change, and then change the name. And the order of the labels can differ, just make sure the label name matches what the actual label is. And as a challenge, if you want to press that plus button on the very top of your counter app, you can actually create a different screen for your application. So earlier we were just working with one screen because it just had one purpose. We just wanted to create one counter app. But you can create multiple different screens for different apps, kind of like how Spotify has different screens, right? You have the home page, you have different playlists, different albums. And Spotify has a lot more screens than we have right now. But yeah, we can create different screens for different uses. So now let's actually try to present the app. So let's go back here. So we're back here and there is this little triangle on the upper right that says web preview, right? And if we click it, we can see our app that we created, right? So yeah, so this is what the app would look like to the user that's using our app. But if we press the click me button, nothing seems to happen. Do we know why? Yeah.
Did we not code something to move it on to the next one?
Exactly. We haven't actually created the code that we need in order for this button to actually work. So we're going to get into that right now. I'm going to come back here. So now we're going to actually make our components interactive with the user. So we're going to switch from design to blocks on the upper left-hand corner, I believe. We're currently on design because we're working on the front end side of our application, the colors, the font, what the user will see. But now we're going to go behind the scenes and we're going to actually code so that application will work. So we're going to change from design to blocks. And then once we do that, we're going to learn how to actually make this button work. So let me go back to Thunkable really quick. All right, so let's leave web preview. So we're clicking this block button right here. And we can change how these components work by clicking on them, right? So we're gonna first work on coding our button. So we're gonna click our click me button. And then we get all of these options of things that we can do with our button, right? So let's take a look at that. So we're going to talk about this piece of code, right? So I showed you all the options that you have, but if you guys could take 5 minutes and put together this piece of code right here, you're going to drag different blocks from the side and I'll show you how. So it says, I'm going to try to do split screen actually. I don't know if this is going to work, but. Ooh, maybe not. Yeah. Okay. So if you guys could go over to Thunkable. And first we're going to choose one of the when operators. We're going to move it over to the main screen right here. And then we are also going to put together the set number labels to text, right? So what we're going to do is we're going to go over to logic really quick. Let's go here. If you scroll down, change this. We're going to drag this over. Put it right here. Let's do that. Go down here. All right, so what I just did is I put together this block of code really quick. And what this does, what the orange function does is when it says when click me button is clicked, then what it does is it sets the green number labels text to number labels text +1. So that can be confusing at first, and I get that. But what we're doing is once the button is clicked, the number goes up by 1. That's all we're doing, right? So when the button is clicked, we set number labels text to whatever text is in there +1, right? So let's try and test this out. Well, actually, I think I'm to give you guys 5 minutes to play around with the components of this and see what happens if you change it to +2. What happens if you change the text to say a word or a number like that. And I'm just going to let you play around with it for a minute. And if you need any help, feel free to raise your hand and let us know. Yeah. All right, if everyone's ready to move on, we're gonna do that. Let's go here. All right, so let's test the app. You want to make sure the counter is working. Raise your hand if the counter is not working. And I these 3 challenges for you guys to figure out on your own. You can kind of just like play around with Thunkable. You want to create a reset button, and you want to think about how you would implement that, right? So for our last code block, what we did is when we click the click me button, we set the number labels text to the text plus 1, right? So if we wanted to do a reset button, how do you think we should approach that? Does anyone have any ideas? Yeah,
Maybe set it back to 0.
back to 0.
Another one that says, instead of 1 being back to 0.
That's exactly it. And once you're done with that, for a second challenge, you want to increase the count based on the user's input, right? So if you remember, and if we go back to Thunkable, there is a user input component to the side. And I want you guys to play around with that and see how you might be able to figure that one out. And then for the final challenge, you want to create a button that decreases the count, but never goes to negative. And that one can be a little bit tricky, and I can come help you out if you need help with that. But yeah, for the rest of the time, we're just going to work on these challenges. And if you need help, feel free to flag us down. All right, sound good? All right.
Are we supposed to be adding to the code that you had on the last screen?
Is right here. Oh, I'm. Are they under your block? Can you also say maybe design? Oh, also ask them if they're clicking the right components. Yeah. So they went to. Oh yeah, you put some thorns in the.
Are you good with it?
Yeah, we're just letting them. So then.
These new items, all things that they had made, like, number,
Yeah, these are components they made over here. We kind of walked them through it. All right, so it is 3:15. So I hope you guys are getting ready to pack up and things like that. I hope you enjoyed today's workshop. If you have any more questions, feel free to find me. I believe my email is under the Technica website. But yeah, I hope you guys explore more with Thunkable and create more apps. And yeah, have a good day. Yeah, thank you.
Anyone didn't get their thing